A paper cup slipped from her trembling hands and shattered across the polished cafe floor, sending hot coffee splashing over expensive shoes and designer bags. Heads turned instantly, impatient sighs filled the bright room, and embarrassed smiles faded into uncomfortable silence as a young woman desperately tried to explain herself without hearing a single word anyone was saying. Her shaking hands formed signs that almost no one understood, while her eyes filled with tears she had spent years teaching herself never to show in public. She had walked into the cafe hoping for an ordinary morning, but within seconds it became another painful reminder that sometimes the loneliest place in the world is a room full of people. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can change lives, forgiveness can heal broken hearts, hope should never be abandoned, and everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, leave a thoughtful comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel to become part of our growing family and our caring community. Clara Bennett had been deaf since she was 3 years old after a severe illness permanently damaged her hearing. Growing up in a small coastal town had taught her resilience, patience, and determination, but adulthood brought different kinds of challenges. Every simple task that most people completed without thinking required careful planning. Ordering food, visiting the bank, attending appointments, or asking for directions often depended on whether the person across from her was willing to slow down, make eye contact, and communicate with kindness. Most days she smiled through awkward moments, pretending they hurt less than they really did. She had built a successful career as a freelance illustrator, filling children's books with colorful characters that spoke through expressions instead of words, yet outside the comfort of her studio she often felt invisible. Across town, Rowan Fletcher was raising his 7-year-old daughter, Eliza, alone after losing his wife to cancer 4 years earlier. Becoming both father and mother overnight had transformed every part of his life. He learned how to braid hair after watching online tutorials, packed school lunches before sunrise, attended every parent meeting, and worked long hours repairing antique furniture in his small workshop. Life was exhausting, but every evening when Eliza smiled, he remembered why he refused to give up. His daughter possessed an unusual curiosity about people. She noticed lonely faces, remembered strangers' birthdays, and had recently become fascinated by sign language after meeting a deaf student during a school art program. Every afternoon they practiced new signs together, laughing through mistakes until they finally became natural. The morning Clara visited the cafe, she had just finished delivering artwork to a nearby publishing office. She wanted nothing more than a quiet cup of coffee before returning home. The cafe looked warm and welcoming through the large sunlit windows. Fresh flowers decorated every table, sunlight reflected softly across the wooden floor, and conversations floated through the room, even though she could never hear them. She approached the counter with confidence, holding a small notebook she often used whenever communication became difficult. Unfortunately, the young employee behind the register was overwhelmed by a long line of impatient customers. He spoke quickly while looking away, pointed toward a menu high above the counter, misunderstood Clara's gestures, and accidentally entered the wrong order. When she politely tried to correct the mistake through signing and writing, confusion grew. The growing line behind her became restless. Someone rolled their eyes. Another customer checked a watch dramatically. Clara felt dozens of impatient faces staring at her. As she stepped backward to make room, someone bumped into her shoulder. The hot drink slipped from her hands. Coffee splashed across the floor. The entire cafe froze. Clara immediately bent down to clean the mess, apologizing silently through desperate gestures while struggling to understand everyone's reactions. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. It was not the spilled coffee that hurt. It was the familiar feeling that she had become an inconvenience simply because communication had failed. At that very moment Rowan and Eliza entered the cafe after spending the morning searching for old furniture at neighborhood garage sales. Eliza instantly noticed Clara's frightened expression. Without hesitation she gently tugged on her father's sleeve and signed the simple phrase they practiced every evening. Rowan understood immediately. He calmly walked toward Clara, knelt beside her, and began helping collect the broken cup. Instead of speaking rapidly or looking uncomfortable, he faced her directly and slowly used the limited signs he knew. They were not perfect, but they carried one powerful message. You are not alone. Clara stared at him in disbelief before a fragile smile appeared. It had been weeks since someone had attempted to communicate in her own language instead of expecting her to adapt instantly. Rowan handed her his phone with a note typed across the screen asking whether she was hurt. Clara shook her head with grateful eyes. Eliza eagerly signed that accidents happened to everyone. Her movements were imperfect and sometimes out of order, yet the effort meant more than flawless grammar ever could. Several customers quietly watched the small interaction. The frustration that had filled the room moments earlier slowly transformed into thoughtful silence. The cafe manager approached looking embarrassed. After realizing what had actually happened, she apologized sincerely and invited Clara to sit while a fresh drink was prepared at no charge. She also admitted that none of her employees had received even basic training for communicating with deaf customers. Clara smiled politely, unwilling to create conflict, but Rowan gently suggested that accessibility was not charity. It was respect. The manager listened carefully. Instead of becoming defensive, she promised to learn from the experience. Over the following weeks Clara unexpectedly crossed paths with Rowan and Eliza several times. Sometimes they met at the public library, sometimes in the park where Eliza loved feeding ducks, and sometimes outside the local bookstore. Each meeting felt less like coincidence and more like life quietly introducing three people who needed each other. Rowan continued learning sign language through free online lessons, while Eliza practiced enthusiastically every single day. Clara, who had spent years expecting disappointment from strangers, slowly lowered the emotional walls she had built around herself. Their friendship grew naturally. Rowan admired Clara's remarkable patience and creativity. She admired his unwavering devotion as a father. Eliza adored them both and often insisted they spend afternoons sketching together beneath the large oak trees in the city garden. Clara taught Eliza how facial expressions carried meaning in sign language, while Rowan shared woodworking techniques that inspired Clara's illustrations. For the first time in years, Clara experienced conversations where she never felt rushed or left behind. Not everyone welcomed the growing friendship. A publishing executive who had previously dismissed Clara because meetings required interpreters suddenly wanted her to sign an exclusive contract after her newest illustrated book became a bestseller. His sudden interest was motivated by profit rather than respect. Clara remembered every ignored email and every meeting where people spoke over her instead of to her. This time she refused to compromise her dignity. With Rowan's quiet encouragement, she negotiated fair terms that included accessibility requirements for every future meeting and public event. Meanwhile, the cafe manager kept her promise. Every employee completed introductory sign language classes. Picture menus were added beside written menus. Digital ordering tablets became available. Small signs welcomed deaf customers by explaining that staff were learning to communicate better every day. At first the changes seemed minor, but gradually they transformed the atmosphere. Customers noticed. Families with deaf children began visiting more often. Elderly guests appreciated the visual menus. What started as one embarrassing accident became the beginning of lasting change throughout the community. Months later the cafe organized a daytime community celebration honoring local artists and volunteers. Clara was invited to display her illustrations, Rowan handcrafted beautiful wooden frames for every piece, and Eliza proudly greeted visitors using sign language she had worked so hard to master. The same cafe where Clara once stood surrounded by embarrassment was now filled with smiles, patience, and understanding. The manager publicly thanked Clara for teaching everyone that inclusion begins with the willingness to learn rather than the fear of making mistakes. Many guests wiped away tears as they realized how one moment of compassion had changed countless lives. Clara looked around the sunlit room and understood that her greatest victory had never been selling books or gaining recognition. It was finding people who saw her abilities before her limitations. Rowan realized that helping someone for a few unexpected minutes had quietly healed parts of his own heart that grief had left untouched. Eliza learned a lesson few adults ever fully understand, that kindness offered without expecting anything in return often creates the most extraordinary miracles. Before we reach the end of this journey, we would love to hear from you. Please leave a meaningful comment sharing a moment when someone showed you unexpected kindness, or tell us how you would help a stranger facing the same situation. Your story might become the hope someone else desperately needs today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember that the smallest act of patience can become the turning point in another person's life. Sometimes changing the world does not begin with grand speeches or impossible sacrifices. Sometimes it begins with one spilled cup of coffee, one father willing to stop, one little girl willing to learn, and one woman brave enough to believe that kindness still exists. On that bright afternoon, none of them walked away with only coffee. They walked away with something far more precious, a family built not by blood, but by compassion, understanding, and the simple decision to truly see another human being.